Afternoon. Voila. So just the first second to tell you that the session will be recorded and the recording will be available on our website. I'm starting sharing my screen while people are joining us. So you should all be able now to see my screen. Voila. So welcome to Tap the Untapped number 2, let's say. So making impact measurable, comparable, and investable. For those of you who joined us also last time, you know that we have just launched this new series as Impact Europe, Tap the Untapped, to discuss a little bit where we are going in terms of resources invested in the ecosystem, and we're touching important elements such as additional impact investing, financial returns, and today is the moment for discussing about how to make impact measurable, comparable, and investable. So here, just a reminder for those that were not there, we are going to have the third session as well. I will be sharing with you the details at the end of this webinar. For today, I'm pleased to be joined by Alessio Venturato, who is my colleague in charge of everything that is data analysis related. And Alessio will share a few insights the same way we did last time. So you will see. I will tell you about the agenda in a few seconds, but before I wanted to welcome the speakers that are joining us today. So Matt Ripple from Impact Frontiers and Matthew McGregor-Stubbs from UBS Optimus Foundation. So I would like to give you the floor just to briefly introduce yourself and your organization. I will start with Matt using the order of the slides. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Alessia. And good morning, everybody. A pleasure to be here today. I'm Matt Ripley. I am a director here at Impact Frontiers based in London. For those who don't know us, we are a non-profit working to build open source public good resources to make it easier for investors to integrate impact into their decision making.
Cool. Thank you so much and welcome, Matt. And now, Matthew, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here today. My name is Matthew McGregor-Stubbs. I'm the Impact Transparency Director for UBS Optimus Foundation. So I broadly cover impact management and measurement for the foundation. UBS Optimus is part of the UBS Social Impact and Philanthropy Group. We're very much at the heart of the company's social impact strategy. We were established over 25 years ago, and we connect philanthropists and impact investors with impactful organizations and social entrepreneurs globally, but also locally within the communities that UBS works in. We're funded by UBS, our clients and employees, and all of our costs are covered by UBS as the parent bank. So all of the funds that we raise are dispersed to impactful, intentful causes. So lovely to be here.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and welcome to you as well. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Alessia Giancelli, Director of Knowledge and Insights at Impact Europe, and I will be introducing you this webinar with few insights, and then I will moderate the panel. So in terms of the agenda, there will be the first part run by me. If you joined the other session, the previous session on the 1st of July, it will be a bit repetitive, but with another angle. Then I will give the floor to Alessio to share the key insights of the day that will be related to impact measurement and management. And then I will moderate the panel with Matt and Matthew. There will be time for Q&A, so don't hesitate to drop your questions in the chat. We will look at them and we will make sure that we ask them to both Matt and Matthew. And there will be closing remarks where we will be sharing few next appointments and also useful links. So without further ado, I'll start with a quick introduction on where we are today in terms of impact ecosystem. So As you all know, and as we normally start when we have online events linked to data, we are a bit far from achieving the SDGs. So if we look at the data of the OECD, we know that there is still a huge financial gap. The OECD talk about 4 trillion per year if we only look at developing countries, which makes the situation particularly severe when it comes to solving societal challenges. And as you can see here, the latest report from the United Nations says that only 17% of the targets are on track, and 35% are either in stagnation or in regression. This means that indeed we wanted to also organize this webinar series to make sure that we look at how we can mobilize more resources in order to fill the gap. And it doesn't stop here, so we have included few more data on the public funding and foreign aid that is also shrinking. So we have looked at the OECD latest results, and we saw that the official development assistance is also declining, basically, again, meaning that huge gaps will be there in terms of supporting economies that need the most. And also, as you all know, the situation with US aid is not very promising, with over 80% of this funding to be cancelled. And it's not just actually US, but other countries are reducing their aid allocation, including some Europe's larger global health funders. So again, in this context, we wanted also to take a closer look at the data that we have collected. Last year, we published this report, the size of impact, in collaboration with the European GSG Impact National Partners. And we've seen that, as you can see on this slide, our sector represents 190 billion when it comes to direct impact investment in unlisted assets. If we look at listed assets, we have something like additional 40 billion, although we believe that the survey was not very representative because we still need to understand what impact investing means when it comes to listed assets. So the good news is that it's a growing sector, because we have seen an increase in terms of resources allocated. But if we look at the overall asset under management that could be eligible for impact investing in Europe, our impact investing sector only represents 2.5%. Maybe a disclaimer here is that the data we are going to present you that I just shared on this slide are just about repayable finance. So we are currently collecting data also on what we call catalytic grant making. So the picture is partial, still looking at impact investing per se, debt, equity, and other financial instruments. This is what we have observed. So this means that we need more capital and we need more impact investing that we defined as having three main elements: intentionality, measurability, and impact management, and additionality. If you were there last session, we discussed a lot about additionality, also linked to non-financial and financial investor contribution. We can share in the chat the link to the recording if you were not there, but today we're going to focus on intentionality and measurability and impact management, just to tell you that when it comes to intentionality, we define it as a conscious and deliberate search for social and environmental impact, with the aim of pursuing a positive results for a defined community. And what is important is intentions in our narrative must be explicitly declared before deploying the capital. And one of the elements that for us defines intentionality is setting up a theory of change. And you will see also in the data that Alice will present you afterwards, 59% of our sample declare to have one theory of change in place, which is good. And then maybe focusing a bit more on another question we asked our respondents, we wanted to know how they incorporate their impact goals into their investment strategies. And what we have seen is that a great majority also codify impact targets in their own legal documents, which is, of course, for us a good result. So we aim at 100%. We will be collecting data next year as well. So we hope to see all these percentages increasing. We will share the slides, so you will have access to all these data. But for the time being, I would like to go to the second element, which is actually measurability and management. So just a recap of what we mean by measurability, which is linked to the quantifiable part of impact investing. So we say that practitioners should be able to identify measurable social and environmental objectives that are, of course, intended to be generated through the capital, but also the non-financial support, as we said last time we met. And then, of course, without a measurement system in place that also should include some qualitative measures, not just quantitative, impact is difficult to be defined. And last but not least, we put a stronger focus on the managing component. So for us, it's important not just to measure the impact, but also to use this data in order to understand what is working and what should be improved. And this should lead to better informed decisions taken by investors. So especially in this kind of context, we see this as an important part of the narrative. Here you can see one of the figures that we have included in our report, where we see that basically 80%, so a greater majority of investors also focus on the management component. Again, we aim at 100%, but we have seen other encouraging insights when it comes to this 12% that is not yet implementing the management part into the IMM framing. I think for the moment, I can give the floor to Alessio in case you have questions on the first part. You can drop us a message, and Alessio, over to you. I'll keep moving the slides.
Yeah, thank you, Alessia. So we can move to the insights of the day. And these are based on a subset of granular data shared within the European Impact Investing Consortium on European impact investors that responded to the latest surveys in 22 and 24. So let me first show you the next slide, the map of the partners that contributed to the data report in 24. Size of impact, we launched it November last year. And yeah, this report really poses the basis for the next analysis that, as I said, are more in depth and on granular data. So first of all, we want to have an overview of the use of different IMM tools in the ecosystem. And so as you can see here, there are all the different percentages of organizations using the IMM initiatives. And what the data are telling us is that there's really a fragmented use of all these tools with only the theory of change and custom internal frameworks used by a majority of investors. And just to be clear, custom or internal frameworks are, for example, internal metrics or indicators, tailored solutions, or other more informal or less recognized tools used by investors. For the other standards, we see a limited uptake, with only the SDG impact standards and the 5 dimensions of impact reaching at least 40%. And what the situation is suggesting is that there is really a broad variety of tools, combined also with a high degree of customization, primarily maybe to adapt to the different context, strategies, and needs of the investors. And therefore, there is really a desire for flexibility and tailored solutions. But these, at the end, at a large market, can lead to challenges in comparability and benchmarking, as well as, of course, credibility and transparency across the market. But to better investigate all the different use of the tools, we wanted to run some more other analysis. And for example, this one, looking at the types of organization, we saw that, for example, the first two, so banks and institutional investors, as well as impact funds, show a greater diversity in the use of tools, a more fragmented mix of frameworks, but also with a significant share using customized or internal indicators. And this is showing, again, an hybrid approach with flexibility, but also standardization. Instead, for foundations, we see a different pattern. It's more converged towards some more recognized frameworks. We see the theory of change, the SDG impact standards, again, the 5 dimensions of impact. But the greater majority, so over 60%, are relying on customized and internal solutions. Going to the next slide, we can see from the geographical lens, we can see how investors across Europe, we can see, for example, Southern Europe and Central Eastern Europe, focusing more on customized solutions and with a less fragmented mix of tools, and whereas Western Europe and Northern Europe tend more to prefer globally recognized frameworks. And on a similar level, also looking at the asset under management size, we can see that, again, small asset management holders prefer customization, and then as investors, asset management increase, we can see a tendency towards more standardized frameworks and tools. And across all these analyses, what we could say and what we see in the data is that even across those group of investors that use standardized tools, we see a high level of fragmentation. So there are either groups preferring more customized solutions, but then there are other preferring standardized solutions that are anyway fragmented in their mix of tools. So I think these are interesting insights that, again, highlights the flexibility in the ecosystem. Finally, we also want to see how investors are using this data. We said how we really stress the need to go beyond the measurement and really manage data. And we want to look at how they're using the impact data they collect. What this graph is telling us is that most investors use impact data for primarily for monitoring and reporting. We see them assessing investing progress or communicating with stakeholders. But data are also used to pre-investment decisions, such as selecting investment opportunities and defining objectives. What as a less traction is using data to refine the theory of change of the investees or the theory of change of investors. And even fewer investors really go in the place of using data to unlock additional capital or set favorable conditions such as incentives and discounts. So we see that there is really an untapped potential for using it to actively drive performance and additional capital decisions. And here, so there's really not just about underuse, but really an opportunity that impact data can become a powerful lever for better outcomes and smarter capital deployment. So I think these are really interesting insights that the data are telling us. And yeah, Alessia, over to you for the panel to see how this plays out in practice.
Thank you, Alessio. And indeed, after all these data insights, we would like to make the conversation live. So I will be asking questions to Matt and Matthew, and I will be starting with Matt. So I'll maybe stop sharing the screen so we can all see Matt better. So Matt, referring to the data we just presented, there is an high fragmentation in Europe when it comes to IMM. So I wanted to know from you if this is also what you observe and what you think the effects of such fragmentations are on the impact ecosystem at large.
Thanks, Alessio, and thanks, Alessio, for sharing the data. Oh, it's so interesting to see, isn't it? Especially that disaggregation by type of organization. And I've been reflecting on that data a little bit, and my take would be that I think there is both a real fragmentation in the world of impact measurement and management tools, but I also think we need to be careful in that there's probably some perceived level of fragmentation as well, because on the one hand, some of those tools and frameworks we've seen on screen, it does kind of look scary when everybody's using different frameworks. There's lots of 4, 5, 3-letter acronyms, but in a way, these tools and frameworks do serve different purposes. So sometimes the fragmentation can appear worse than it actually is, because I'm thinking the phrase different horses for different causes, at least we use here in the UK. For example, the SDG impact standards that were on screen, they provide that overarching approach to managing impact and informing decisions. The 5 dimensions of impact developed by the Impact Management Project, that I'm happy to talk a little bit more in detail about later, provide that shared language and taxonomy and those foundational building blocks for how to think about impact. And then on screen on all those tools, you also saw more granular metric sets like Iris Plus that can help you orientate towards the metrics and give the specific ways and definitions for measuring what matters. So in other words, some of them do solve different pieces of the impact measurement puzzle, and a lot of them do fit together quite well and can be mutually reinforcing. So it's not an either or, it could be a both and. So the 5 dimensions of impact, for example, are embedded in things like the SDG impact standards, referenced in another framework, the operating principles for impact management that I saw on screen on the data presented, and actually they form part of the underlying architecture of Iris Plus. So I do think behind the scenes in all these initiatives, there has been a lot of interoperability, mapping, and trying to make them mutually reinforcing. That said, I do agree that real fragmentation exists, right? It happens, especially in the language and methods we use, right? Take terminology. I think it's probably remarkable how many different ways we all still use terms like outcome and impact to mean different things. And that's not just semantics, because I do think it sometimes leads us to talking across purposes, and it has real implications, especially in terms of setting expectations for what we measure. When I get a call and someone says impact, it's always useful to understand, first of all, what do they actually mean by that? Are they referring to the definition of impact being a long-term outcome, or are they meaning a change in an outcome caused by an organization? And that distinction does matter, Alessa, right? It's kind of the latter points to more additionality, which was the topic of the previous webinar. And that actually gets to the core of many of the debates around, what things like impact investing even mean. But honestly, I do think we've seen quite a bit of progress in addressing fragmentation over the years, particularly through collective field building efforts. But I do also think that there are pretty structural reasons why sometimes we hit a ceiling in kind of greater alignment and harmonization. And probably one of those is competitive pressure. In a competitive environment, say, for instance, if you're an impact fund manager, you're often incentivized and you want to differentiate yourself. And one of the ways of differentiating yourself can be on the type of frameworks, tools, approaches you use, and developing proprietary frameworks or bespoke methodologies, which is great. But unfortunately, that sometimes means that those managers are rewarded for kind of going it alone rather than aligning with or building on what's already being widely used.
No, thank you so much, Matt. Of course, everything resonates well, and we touch upon the problem of definitions also in the previous webinar, which seems to be still a challenge despite the efforts of organizations such as ours in putting frameworks and clear definitions to define the same things. And also, I think that what you said about competitiveness is very interesting. Sometimes this is not associated with the benchmarking opportunities that investors might have if maybe they start using the same instruments. So it might be something that can help them being described more competitive and cooler than peers, but we can talk about this another time. But you mentioned this actually, and I wanted to go back to this point, how actually you can combine different tools. So we have seen that the 5 dimensions are used by 43% of practitioners reply to the survey. How do you see them used integrated with other tools, but also maybe if you have observed some challenges in their adoption, so despite your effort as Impact Frontiers lately?
Yeah, it's another such an interesting figure to see from the European context, and it tracks quite broadly what we see in terms of the use of the 5 dimensions of impact globally. So the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, has similar data points, but globally. So it's about half of all impact investors worldwide, so that's about $1 trillion in capital, uses the 5 dimensions of impact as building blocks in their approach. So it tracks quite closely in terms of European usage versus global. For those not familiar, maybe I'll just spend a couple of seconds recapping what the 5 dimensions of impact actually are and where they came from to provide some context. So, goodness, almost 10 years ago now, time flies. Almost 10 years ago, the Impact Management Project, or IMP, as you'll have seen on screen, as it's known for short, brought together this practitioner community of about 3,000 investors and enterprises. And their goal was not to build a single methodology, but to build consensus language and concepts around how we measure, improve, and disclose on impact. So what came out of that community of practitioners was a common logic, essentially a shared understanding or a way to help us all assess the effects that organizations have on people on the planet, with an aim of kind of reducing the negative and increasing the positive. And one of the core consensus frameworks they came out with was what's called these 5 dimensions of impact. So it encouraged organizations to see impact in a multi-dimensional rather than a single-dimensional way. And the link's on screen for those who want to dig into it more, but the 5 dimensions of impact are basically what, who, how much, contribution, and risk. So what outcomes the enterprise is contributing to, who's actually experiencing those outcomes, how much change is taking place in terms of the scale, depth, and duration of the change, contribution, which is basically whether the businesses, the enterprise's actions drive outcomes better than what would have happened otherwise, and then risk, the risk that the intended impact doesn't occur as expected. For investors, there's also a kind of, for funders more broadly, there's an additional piece, which is investor contribution. So that's not just about whether the organization you're funding is leading to better outcomes than would have happened anyway, but actually whether your involvement and role as an investor is unlocking or helping unlock better outcomes than would otherwise be possible. And that's sometimes kind of informally referred to as a 6th dimension. So when the IMP wound down in 2021 and wrapped up its 5-year term, at Impact Frontiers, we became the official, I guess, steward or custodian of those 5 dimensions. And what we're here in terms of how they're being used, and initially they were very much used for impact investors, but more broadly, as you'll have seen the stats on screen, they're used by a variety of organizations worldwide, both for profit and not for profit, to kind of construct and think about impact in a multidimensional way. Probably 3 main uses at the moment. First is to assess potential investments or opportunities to support. Often that's done through an impact rating. So where you're taking each of those dimensions and plotting them and either looking at them all separately or bringing them together into a single score. Either taking all of the dimensions, as I've just described them, or picking a few that are most material to the mission and mandate of that organization. So it's used as a decision-making tool to help decide who to back. Second main use is tracking and assessing on impact performance. And that's really trying to help get that mindset right post-investment or post-grant to actually ensure that people are not just looking at a single dimension of impact, like scale and fixing on the number of people reached, but actually thinking around things like the depth of impact, the duration of impact, and trying to have that multi-dimensional view of impact performance. And the third, and this is definitely a nascent practice, but one that's really interesting, is then figuring out well, okay, everyone, at least in the investment community, is very good at the financial management side and making financially driven investment decisions. What does it look like when you're putting impact on a level par with those financial factors? So how do you actually take the 5 dimensions and use them to integrate impact into your financial decision making, to have that more holistic view of both impact and financial potential, but also performance? And people tend to use these 5 dimensions. If they're starting out from scratch, you can use those as a foundation for your impact framework. Or if you've already got an impact framework, we see people using them as a bit of a checklist, a bit of a gap analysis to spot, maybe any areas for improvement. So you'll see the link in the chat where you can explore them further. I think just the very last thing to quickly note is that we did update the 5 dimensions last year based on a social equity audit. Some super interesting practical use cases around the 5 dimensions there, particularly how we review them through a gender, racial, and data equity lens. So there's the 5 dimensions, but there's how they're used in practice. And what we really looked at was how they can be used from a more stakeholder, inverted commas, beneficiary informed perspective to make sure that diverse viewpoints are reflected in how decisions are being made and how impacts are being valued, and that the methods used to actually assess impact based on the 5 dimensions don't kind of introduce unintentional bias because of the way investors or we see the world versus those communities and individuals who we are hoping to benefit. So I'll leave it there, Alessia.
Thank you so much, Matt, also for referring to this last study. And if, Alessia, you can find the link, maybe you can also share it in the chat. And the last question for you, Matt. So looking at the use of impact data, as Alessia said, we have observed this importance placed on impact reporting, but less on strategic decision-making process, which you already touched upon while talking about the 4 dimensions. But you also have developed the impact reporting norms. So can you explain us what these are and how can inform also investors' decision-making?
Yeah, happy to. And we can't see it on screen, but if you recall back from the data that Alessia was presenting, if you look at all of the tools and frameworks and you kind of code each of them, whether they refer to framework standards or norms for impact practice, so how you actually manage for impact, versus performance, how you actually disclose your impact, what you'll see is the vast majority of those, theory of change, SDG impact standards, operating principles, primarily relate to impact management practices. So I think that shows there's been a lot of progress in recent years around harmonizing approaches for impact management practices, and that's super. But actually, when it comes to impact reporting and how you actually disclose performance, there's been a lot less consensus. I think what we're hearing is that people really still grapple with some fundamental questions like, how do we assess and disclose progress towards our impact goals? Like, how can we tell whether performance is good, bad, or somewhere in between? And ultimately, how do we make better decisions, not just based on impact potential, but actually impact performance? So when we started exploring this topic a few years ago, we heard this common frustration. It's like, well, we all prepare impact reports. Impact reports should be the place where these questions are answered, but actually impact reporting isn't really working that well. And that's because we heard, as we all probably know, impact reports are from more kind of marketing, impact management oriented. Funds and organizations spending a huge amount of time and energy in preparing these reports, but it wasn't actually clear to them whether they were even being read at all. And then when we listen to those reading the reports, think of like asset owners or family offices, pension funds, foundations, we often heard those receiving reports like, well, they're not quite as useful as they could be for my decision making because we get incomplete data, we get inconsistent data, and it's not comparable. So it's actually really difficult to make investment or engagement decisions based on those reports. But I think at their best, those impacts reports should drive accountability and learning and helping people understand what's working and what's not. So a key question for us a couple of years ago was listening to all this, like, what should an impact report actually contain to be useful for readers, but also as low burden as possible for those actually writing the report? So a couple of years ago, we launched this process where we spoke to over 300 organizations to try and develop the first consensus for what the content structure and format of an impact report should be like. And out of this emerged the impact performance reporting norms. We'll drop the link in the chat in a second for those who want to look at it more. Thank you so much, Alessio. But these are an open access, non-proprietary set of criteria that anyone can use to assess, evaluate, verify the quality of an impact report, or use it as the building blocks again to write your own. They are primarily designed for impact funds, reporting to capital providers, but they're also a useful reference point for any organization, we think, reporting on its impact. I'm not going to go into them in detail now, just to say the idea is that they're not super prescriptive. They provide, I guess, the ingredients for an impact report, but how you kind of bake that recipe is completely up to you. They've got 6 sections. Each section's got kind of practical recommendations for what to include. And the idea is to try and overcome common reporting challenges that we heard. Things like trying to avoid what we call floating data, data without context. Really hard for people to make strategic decisions on impact data if the data point doesn't have a baseline. There's no target, there's no trend analysis, it doesn't tell us much. Or things like flat data, where we understood from readers, people trying to use impact reports for strategic decision making. If all data looks the same, if there's no differentiation of data quality, we're being told to have an equal level of confidence in all data points. It's really hard, again, to see what data is decision useful versus not. So the reporting norms try and address some of those pain points. They're being piloted. They're in a 2-year implementation phase. Would love to have a chat. Anyone who's interested more, please do get in touch if you'd like to find out more details.
Thank you so much, Matt, and for sharing everything. And you will see afterwards, I mean, they were conceived for impact funds, but they can be useful for other actors. So I'm happy now to start giving the floor to Matthew. And I also have 3 questions for you, Matthew. So we have seen that apart from fragmentation, 50% of respondents also use tools that are not standardized solutions, such as Alessio said, internal metrics or ad hoc tools. And actually, UBS Optimus Foundation has developed a tool that could be a valid standardized solution. Could you first explain the audience what this tool is, and also tell us what were the drivers and the advantages that you have seen in developing such a tool? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I think let me take a step back and give everyone a bit of context about some of the work that we do. So people are mainly familiar with UBS Optimus Foundation as a philanthropic foundation, and that is a large part of what we do. But alongside traditional philanthropic grant making, we also do impact investing, we do outcomes-based financing, we do social finance. So there's quite a broad range of sort of capital activities that we undertake. And one of the key things that we try to do, because we are not an endowed foundation, is draw in additional capital to support the efforts and the impact that we intend to have. So for us, we very strongly believe that it's important to be as transparent as possible about impact and the impact that we have, to measure that as accurately as possible, and to make that information publicly available, all with the aim of drawing in additional resources to help us achieve greater impact. And so there's a quote that's attributed to, I think it was Michael Bloomberg, talking specifically about carbon credits, but we work in climate and environment, but I think the same is true of education and also health, where we work as well. And he says that for markets to work well, they have to be transparent, they have to be trusted, and they have to be standardized. And I think those are things which most of us on the call today could probably agree with. But he also says that those qualities have largely eluded the carbon credit market. And I think, this speaks to some of the challenges that people have been talking about in terms of how do we know what we're meaning in terms of impact? If somebody says that they are having an impact, how do we know that they can back that up? How can they verify it? And this is, again, something which we see as being very important to the clients that we work with, because often we are funded by our clients, whether they are ultra high net worth individuals, they may be family offices, they may be other philanthropic organizations. But almost a third of family offices globally are looking to better understand how they can have philanthropic impact. A large proportion of them report to us that having better data on the impact and better measurability would help and would give them greater confidence in investing for impact. And actually, over half of the family offices that UBS Optimus Foundation has interactions with have told us that the challenges in impact measurement are actually preventing them from allocating more money to impact investments. So all of this gives us the sense that impact and rating impact, and I'll talk about the impact rating tool in a moment, is critical to the work of our foundation. It's a necessity for us in terms of getting those resources into the foundation, but also in terms of giving people confidence in the work that we do and the impact we deliver. And so for that reason, acknowledging some of the many challenges that we face in terms of verifying outcomes, we introduced an impact rating tool, which looks at different dimensions of impact. It aligns closely with the 5 dimensions that Matt mentioned earlier, but it also tries to align some of the different frameworks, such as the OMIP. You can find more details about it in the case study, but essentially it takes those dimensions of impact, looks at the different considerations, asks our program directors to provide justifications and substantiation or the evidence for a rating which they assign, for example, to the extent to which a program is sustainable, the extent to which it may have potential to scale, the extent to which it's aligned with our strategic objectives, and the extent to which it actually can demonstrate that it is an evidence-based intervention or that there is impact occurring. And so for us, in terms of the advantages, it also gives us an ability to look across the different activities that we undertake and the different portfolios to see, are there particular gaps within those portfolios? Are there areas where we can provide further support to our investees and our grantees? And I think that's one of the other really strong benefits that we're seeing, is that it allows us to have a structured conversation. We're not yet at a point of actually communicating what that rating is to the organizations that we support. It's something which we're having ongoing discussions about, but we certainly use the contents of the impact rating tool to support the discussions that we can have with grantees and investees, identifying areas of strength, of potential development, and then looking to see, are there ways in which we or other funders can come in and support in that gap.
Thank you, Matthew. Super interesting also your last point on the fact that it's not just for you to attract additional capital for clients and potential investors, but to have a better discussions with grantees and investees. Very interesting. And maybe the follow-up question is, have you seen the benefits in reality that you were expecting, some lessons learned already that you can share with the audience?
So I think we're seeing a lot more structure in terms of how those discussions are happening, not just in terms of the grantee-investee piece, but also actually sort of during the approval process and the application process for a grant or an investment that's coming through. So there's sort of anecdotal feedback is that those discussions are more robust, that there's greater rigor. Certainly, there's more consideration of the evidence base or the interventions that are being supported. I think one of the other points which is brought out in the case study, and I don't know, Alessio, if you've already dropped the link in, but you can actually see some quotes from some of the different program directors sort of talking about how they're finding it beneficial to their work. There's a quote from one of the program directors talking about how it supports her in her regular catch-ups with investees and grantees. I think the other thing that is very nice about the tool and the way that it's structured is it's intended to capture the life cycle of the grant or the investment. So it starts out with a rating at the application stage. It then goes into having sort of a cyclical update, so that, for example, every 12 months, you're seeing an updated rating. So if there has been a stated ambition for somebody to improve in a certain area, you can capture that and reflect on it. And then also at the point of exiting a grant or investment. So I think it gives you that sort of, from a management perspective, but also from a reporting perspective, and being able to look and see, okay, what's happening over time in a portfolio. And I think one of the things which we've also found useful is being able to have sort of that more holistic picture, but then dive into the detail as well.
Thank you, Matthew. And indeed, the link to the case studies in the chat if you want to explore more. And it was done in partnership with Impact Frontiers. So we're connecting the dots with the two organizations we have today on the panel. And maybe last question specifically on foundations, Matthew. So we have seen that 64% of foundations, so more than the overall sample, rely on internal metrics, indicators, and tailored solutions. Why do you think this is the case, specifically for foundations? And what would you say to your peers to encourage them maybe to adopt something similar to what you have just described, which is the tool that you have developed and you are sharing insights on with the ecosystem?
So I think if we start with the question of why are foundations pursuing different tools or different strategies, I think it's almost by nature, because we are focusing on different things. And I think it's, especially if you're working across different sectors, it's much more difficult to have a single sort of approach to something that will work for you. And so I think that's partially one reason. I think another reason is just natural evolution. Things have evolved over time. Different foundations have been in place for different lengths of time, doing different things. And I also think sometimes we can be a little bit selfish, because we want to report the things that we want to report. There are the things that have become important to us for whatever reason that we have historically reported on. And so I think what we ideally need to do, and this is sort of reflected in some of the conversations that I've had, both with other foundations, but also with the organizations that we support or we invest in, is try to, as much as possible, align on similar metrics or similar things that we feel it is important to report on within those sectors. Because otherwise, organizations that are already facing a huge burden in terms of reporting to us are focusing more and more of their efforts on reporting impact to us as funders, rather than prioritizing having greater impact. So I think that's the conversation that we should be having, is how can we encourage the sort of the standardized approach in as sort of light touch a way as possible, whilst also being able to verify that impact, so that we can confidently say this is the impact that is being had and felt on the ground.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Again, this is a comment on trying not to overburden investees and grantees is very much needed, especially when it comes from a practitioner, because this is something that we normally say. And I think that what you just said, so trying to align on similar elements to report on, might also facilitate collaboration, which is another extremely important dynamic that we should probably stress and boost a bit more in the ecosystem. I mentioned this in the first webinar. I'll repeat it now. We are engaging as Impact Europe in a research study about collaboration across the continuum of capital, and we really would like to see what are the drivers that can enforce collaborations, and definitely aligning on what to report on might be an element that we should look at. And maybe going back to Matt, considering we still have something like four minutes for final comments, do you have any comments or suggestions also following what Matthew just shared, and also considering that you were part of this case study drafting? So over to you, Matt, and thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing the insights from your direct experience.
Probably just to plug the case study. I think it's a really interesting read. I'd say that from our experience, impact ratings, the 5 dimensions, as you've probably seen from the stats on screen, have been used quite a lot, in fact, predominantly by impact investors over the years. I think it's really interesting, and which we're so excited that Optimus Foundation has put it in the public domain, is how that applies to a philanthropic funding context as well. It's across both grants and investment. So I think super interesting. The other reflection would be, I do think there is an important question around harmonizing and standardizing what to report. I would say that the reporting norms also comes at it from the perspective it's important to think about both what to report as well as how to report, given that there are always going to be differences in strategy, context, which means it's aligning on what to report. Standardized metrics often does lead to that lowest common denominator. There's always going to be things that are reported a little bit differently. How do we have a set of principles to make good decisions about what to leave in and out of reports? So the reporting norms does anchor on the vast experience of things like financial accounting reporting standards around how decisions are made there about, making sure that for comparability, we're reporting alike things in the same way, different things in different ways. It sounds obvious, but I think sometimes our social environmental impact reporting practices, we skip some of those foundations around transparency of disclosures and jump straight into standardizing the what to measure. But I think consistency in how to measure and how to disclose what we're measuring, the decisions we're making, and choosing what information to present is super important as well. So again, happy to double click on that for anyone who's interested.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I don't know, Matthew, if you still have a final reflection, and then I will advertise our next appointment altogether, actually. But Matthew, before I restart sharing the screen, any final thoughts or suggestions for the peers?
I think I would say, what we have put together is a tool that works for us as a foundation. It may not necessarily work for every foundation, but it's also something which we are continuing to try to iterate. We feel that there are further improvements that we can make. This is not a perfect solution, but I would encourage other people to take sort of a similar step on the journey to investigate and look at how something like this could work for you.
And this is a perfect assist for me, actually, because in the next slide I'm going to share, I would like to actually, yes, share this QR code for you, because as we said, we would like to keep discussing with Matt and Matthew. So we have organized an interactive members only gathering. So if you are not a member of Impact Europe, you can reach out to us to know how you can join the community. For the purpose of this session, we will take a closer look on how to adapt the reporting norms for foundations specifically. So as Matt said at the beginning, for the moment, impact investors, impact funds are becoming expert in those norms and frameworks, but we would like to see how we can have also foundations looking into those. And we will also discuss in depth the impact ratings, unpacking basically the tool that OBS, Optimus Foundation, just launched. And as Matthew said, with this idea also of sharing feedback and really have the possibility to test it and refine it while we go. So this is really something for the community. You will see it in the registration form. The next date is 10 September, 1 hour and a half online, again, specifically focused for foundations that are part of the community. And also, as I said at the very beginning, our Tap the Untapped series will continue. We will have the first and last appointment on 17th of July. So next week, if I'm not mistaken, with Gaetana Eriks from FITRUST and with Rita Casimiro from Maize Impact. And the idea there is to keep discussing about something that we mentioned today, specifically how we can make sure that we attract additional resources when it comes to impact investors. So everything that Matthew was referring to when it comes to how one of the reasons why they have developed this impact rating tool. And then, of course, as I said last time, we are going to keep discussing all these topics in November in Malmo during our Impact Week, 18 and 20 of November. And then, as you know, I mean, we're a bit obsessed with data and impact. So we also would love to hear your comment about the session, understanding also if there are other topics you're interested in, knowing that, again, we have collected this data in partnership with other organizations, other European national partners of GSG Impact, and we are able to deep dive into the data because we have created internal dashboards and we can come up with new things, and we will be launching also a new survey in 2026 to have more and new data. So again, I was able to finish super on time. I would like to take this final moment to really thank Matt and Matthew for the time of discussing with us this important topic, of sharing your perspectives, and especially for having also published something already about this, because we believe in sharing knowledge in order to advance the ecosystem and stimulate peer learning. If you have any question, you were a bit shy today, but don't hesitate to reach out to us. You know where to find us. And again, once more, thank you to Alessio, who was able to put together all these data insights, leveraging the data we collect. The recording will be available soon with the slides on our website, and have a nice day. Thank you again, Matt and Matthew, for being with us today. See you on the 17th of July for the next episode. Bye.